VST, and he's going to do a executive review of our 2019 independent audit for you.
He's our president, Ken Long.
Hi, folks. How are you? Happy to be presenting here. Everyone should have a copy of a board of directors presentation in your materials. Just want to confirm that you all have that. That'll be the document that I work off of. I'm noticing as I look in my camera here that real reddish glow. That just happens to be the paint in my room here. I don't know if you guys can, but it's throwing off a pink aura here on my screen. But anyways, so here presenting the results of the audit. Obviously, this is we couldn't meet in person because of the facts and circumstances, and just due to the logistical timing, we were unable to meet in March. So we're going back a couple months to discuss the results of our audit. On the plus side, there was obviously no significant issues to discuss. Otherwise, we would have done so even in an emergency setting. So I'll just briefly walk you through these slides, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to discuss. Earlier, I did meet with the Finance and Audit Committee and gave them another presentation on the results. So this is a summarized version of that. Flipping past the cover page, we'll talk a little about the financial statements. What I've snipped here on this cover is the table of contents, and the financial statements are largely consistent with what you've seen in the past. The first section is the independent auditor's report. That's my report to you folks on the financial statements. The next section is the management's discussion and analysis. I like to refer to that kind of as the cliff notes. If you were a bad English student like I was, you had a lot of cliff notes. The MD&A is a summarized version of the financial statements and includes some interpretive analysis as well. The actual numbers can be found on pages 14, 15, and 16 of the statements, and the notes to those statements can be found on pages 17 to 38. And behind that is what we have our required supplementary information, some schedules, and finally our GAS report on internal controls and compliance. So continuing on, the audit opinion. You'll see here on the next page that we have an unmodified opinion. An unmodified opinion is also known as a clean opinion. It's the highest level of assurance that I can give you, the board, that the financial statements are free of material error. So it's a good opinion. It means we believe the financial statements are clearly represented. Our GAS report, which is a government auditing standards report, it's an exception-based report, meaning it's not an opinion per se, but it would be the vehicle to which we will report any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. As there are no control matters to report, the GAS report is considered clean as well. So a good GAS report and a good opinion on the financial statements as a whole. Moving on to the next page, just a snapshot here of the financial statements. I've snipped this from the actual report. A few comments on that to the side here. Your net position increased $5.5 million. Your net position is akin to your equity in the authority. So a $5.5 million increase is very strong. We had continued investment in capital assets. We added about $4.6 million in capital assets during the year. In addition to that, we paid off $2.4 million in debt. So largely the cash flows of the operation were used and reinvested into our capital assets and the reduction in debt, resulting in a increase in net position. Your unrestricted net position is very strong. That includes some of your board designations. Earlier, we were talking about your reserve for other post-employment benefits. That would be included, although that's a board restriction for financial statement purposes. It's included in unrestricted. On the face of the statement, we only include those external restrictions. So your unrestricted net position is very strong for the year ended December 31st, 2019. Moving on to the income statement, operating revenues were positive. Obviously, we had some increased tipping fees. Our operating expenses did trend up as well. Some of that is non-cash related items, including your post-closure accrual and depreciation expense. Obviously, we're doing everything here on the full accrual basis, just like a business would. So we're depreciating our assets, and we have certain accounting estimates that end up in our financial statements that, although we don't necessarily have to pay cash for those right now, we're accruing for items such as your post-closure accrual, and those impact our statements. So that's just a quick snapshot of the income statement. The notes to the financial statements, again, just reiterating the fact that we're accrual-based. So the timing of cash flows does not necessarily dictate when we record revenue or when we record expenses. We record revenue when it's earned, and we record an expense when it's incurred, not necessarily when it's paid. I mentioned this earlier to the audit committee. If you were to look at our subsequent events, there's really no mention of COVID-19. And part of that is due to the timing of when we completed our audit. We were in the field in February, and it's hard to believe that only 3 months ago, we really weren't even thinking about this. And the audit was wrapped up in March, early March, even before things, travel restrictions and impacts were felt by anyone. So there's no disclosure. If you were to look at some of our financial statements that we issue now, we almost always require some kind of COVID-19 disclosure. Interestingly, as was discussed earlier, the authority really hasn't had any financial impact yet. And so it's kind of unknown as to whether we will be impacted by certain events that are happening around us. We actually had a very positive first quarter that Joe reported on earlier. I don't want to steal his thunder. But there's no mention of COVID-19 in our statements. Had we issued the statements later, it's possible we would have had more of a generic disclosure about the event and how it could impact us, but kind of a general disclosure. The notes in general are fairly consistent with the prior year. There was no new disclosures or other matters that we had to add to the notes as part of our 2019 audit. On the next slide, we have some disclosures about the restricted assets. We have, that's just a table pulled right out of the financial statements. And all I wanted to point out here on this slide, where we're talking about the restricted assets, is the fact that we have various reserves we're required to comply with, just by the nature of being what we are. All of those reserves were fully funded for the periods ending December 31st, 2019 and 2018. So we're doing what we're supposed to be doing as it relates to those. The next slide is just a little demographic here on capital assets. And I just wanted to point out that we continue to invest heavily in our infrastructure here. $18.1 million in capital assets over the last 5 years. And the snapshot here is just showing you where those assets are recorded in what kinds of operations and how they're included in the total. But again, another significant year of capital asset additions. A little bar chart here that I did myself. I was pretty proud, showing the annual capital asset outlays per year on this slide. We do have some bonds out there. Those continue to get paid out. Obviously, no new issuances during 2019 and none during 2020 to my knowledge. Because of our strong financial condition, we're not only able to pay down our debt, but we're able to take the income that we generate from operations and reinvest it in our own capital assets, our own infrastructure, which is really nice. So over the period of 2013 to 2019, we've paid off $27.8 million. We paid about $2.4 million in debt during the 2019 reporting period. You know, and interestingly, that debt service payment is probably pretty close. I'd have to check, but to what we have for depreciation expense. So the two kind of match each other from a cash flow perspective. In addition to our financial audit, a couple other deliverables, we do a rate covenant compliance, an examination of that, the rate covenants, the payments to the debt service fund and reserve requirements. As a result of those, we found it to be compliant with the terms of the indenture. And we also do an investment compliance, a report that is required by the New York State, and that's basically examining whether we complied with the New York State investment requirements, and we determined the authority to be compliant with that. So those are separate deliverables we issue as part of our services. And last but not least, we actually have this underway. I could see files being exchanged between the authority and BSD today. I was getting email updates. The last thing we have to do for you as part of this year's service would be our agreed upon procedures for the Utica Fund, the Utica Solid Waste. We traditionally do that after the audit, and that's underway, and we should have that hopefully within the coming weeks, our results of that audit for you folks. Just to summarize some basic required communications, we did receive the full cooperation of everyone at the authority. There were no significant issues discussed. Any audit requests we received from the authority was responded to adequately. And we were pleased with the results of the work and the documentation and the consistency of the records that the authority keeps. It allows us to do our audit in a smooth and efficient manner. And consistently year after year, your audit is one of the first ones done by BST. And another thing that I'll point out, which was mentioned at the audit committee meeting, is the fact that there were no audit adjustments as a result of our work. We go through virtually every single account. We do a number of tests over things. And the trial balance that was supplied to us at the beginning of the audit were the same numbers that ended up at the conclusion of the audit, which I mentioned puts you in a pretty rare group of organizations that have such accuracy over your accounting records. So overall, a very positive audit from our perspective. That was the message that I gave to the Audit and Finance Committee and the message that I'm giving to you folks now. Those were my prepared remarks. If there's any questions you have for me, I'm happy to answer those questions. And as a reminder, as I reminded the Audit and Finance Committee, I report to you folks. You're the ones that I'm responsible to. If you think of your question tomorrow, the next day, or the day after, I am happy to speak with you at your convenience. Obviously, now, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Anything anybody have?
Here.
No.
Nobody has any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, we'll let Brendan go, and Joe will move on with his first quarter financials. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Brendan.
Appreciate it.
Okay, I'll get started on the first quarter financial report. I'm pleased to report for the first quarter of 2020, we have a $2,053,816 first quarter surplus. Typically, the first quarter is the slowest of our quarters. For instance, in 2016, we had $559,065 as our surplus. 2017 was $553,971. 2018 is $602,734. And last year was $341,834. So as you can see, this first quarter was a record year or a record first quarter for the authority. The result of the surplus mostly has to do with the local development projects that we have going on. We have the downtown hospital, we have the Rome cable cleanup, and we have the Nexus Center. Those all contributed to that healthy surplus in the first quarter. Our revenues for the first quarter were $7,006,240. Last year, they were $4,918,454. We are at 35% of our revenue budget for the entire year of 2020. Typically, we're in the low 20s to about 25%. So as you can see, this was a fantastic first quarter. I'll leave my remarks at that. And does anyone have any questions on this first quarter financial report?
Anybody for Joe? Okay, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Bill, go ahead with updates.
Okay, I have a number of quick updates. As the board knows, I've been trying to keep you updated right along with the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to start with the Western Transfer Station renovation project. So our goal with the Western Transfer Station renovation project has been to allow certain, since we were deemed essential and a certain amount of construction can continue at our facilities, we did ask the contractor to hold off on all the construction on which they could not exercise the social distancing or put safety practices in place. So we've had essentially one or two individuals continuing with small items where they could individually work. The contractor has continued to order materials, and we expect them to start up as early as Friday. And the indications from the governor are good that they're going to allow all construction to continue starting Friday. So things like the siding, the roofing, that was all put on hold. The transfer station floor repairs, materials were delivered and unloaded, but because you need a large crew to continue with that, it was held off. And we hope to turn the throttle on related to that soon. Cell 4 construction, the board will recall you just awarded that construction project at the March board meeting, and we have exchanged bonds and insurance with Kubricki. Their original schedule did not call for them to be on site until late May, early June, and they're submitting all their submittals now to B&L to essentially continue that project. That is a 2-year project, so in 2020, we expect most of the earthwork and soil liner screening to still occur, and the cell actually be constructed in the construction season of 2021. Landfill gas, the last time we met in March, we had awarded a small project to a specialized driller to extend our landfill gas system. As the board is aware, every year we budget a certain amount of money to extend our gas wells, install new wells, repair old wells. We ultimately had the contractor on site, and we drilled an additional 13 wells, which brings us to a total of 121 vertical wells and 36 horizontal wells on the site. We still haven't hooked up 2 of those total wells yet. Our average total flow now is about 2,200 SCFM of gas, where in April of 2019, we were at 1,600 SCFM. So we're continuing to expand the amount of gas that we're recovering and destroying or diverting to the energy recovery plant. So the gas system is the 2020 planned improvements have essentially been completed. My final update, and this can lead into discussion with the board, is just a summary or an up-to-date summary of the COVID-19 effects on our system. As you heard from Joe, we had really a record first quarter. Many of those development projects that began in first quarter, such as MVHS and the Rome cable cleanup and development project, continued into April. So from a tonnage standpoint, our April of 2020 compared to April of 2019 and previous years, we still had a very healthy April. All of our operational facilities continued to operate. As you know, we postponed our special programs such as HHW and sales of compost at our facilities. We're still wholesaling compost. Many of your spring cleanups at the municipal level have either been canceled for the season, but also a good portion have been postponed. So the industry as a whole, when the country shut down and when New York State went on pause, the solid waste industry saw about a 16% decrease in commercial waste, and that's primarily related to commercial retail and your restaurant waste at the restaurant sites. as well as certain industrial waste. And they saw at the same time a 25% increase in MSW from residents because people were now sheltering in place and producing more waste at the home. We have not, we don't have our final numbers yet. We've seen similar transaction activity at our scales and at our tipping floors. So residents bringing in renovation waste like that, clean out waste has increased. And obviously we saw that slight constriction in the commercial retail waste delivery. Many of our industries were deemed essential, so they continued to produce waste and continue to operate their businesses. So to really summarize, our financials for April are still pretty strong since we were deemed essential. We're continued to operate, and we really won't know the fallout of the full sheltering in place in New York on pause for a number of months. I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
No question.
All right, Mr. Chairman, any additional questions?
Anybody have anything else for the good of the order?
Yes, may I ask a question?
There it comes.
Jim,
Of course.
Jim? No, Billy, what about the bagging of the compost? As you know, I got a complaint today.
Yeah, I spoke with a person who buys them wholesale. We're hoping, Jim, to, again, we put that off based on the fact that we get hundreds of homeowners who are asked to shelter in place will show up in droves and want to load those bags. And we were concerned over the social distancing and how to handle that. So we're talking before Memorial Day weekend, Jim, we hope to start bagging and start selling and retail at our site.
Okay.
Ben,
You
as
don't have
mentioned,
any,
we're selling it in bulk, so the person who complained to you, they're buying it in bulk for their customers.
yeah. Well, I just want to tell you to get on the stick because I don't like to hear these complaints. Okay?
All right. That's a big deal. Yeah. That's a big issue.
Jim, I'm glad you could join us on your phone.
Well, I'll give Kenny his phone number then.
Somebody mute that site.
Right.
Hey, I was on one meeting with another organization, and because I had my speakers, it was a Zoom meeting, and because I had my speakers hooked up to my computer, my microphone wouldn't work. So I'm screaming at the thing. After finally I figured it out, I said, "You don't know how lucky you people were that my microphone didn't work." Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Jim.
So I missed Jim's comments, the financial report at all.
Yeah, he had no comments,
No,
Harry.
there was no comments, Harry, other than your TV was too loud.
That or the audit, I don't know. He's slipping.
No, Jimmy didn't have it. He was shoveling stones. So if there's no further business, then I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hertline, can I have a second?
Second, Jim Williams.
Williams, all in favor to adjourning until June 15th at 4:30?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, folks.
Thank
Stay
you all.
safe.
Thank you all.
Everybody stay
Thank you.
safe.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye now.